Deep within an ancient temple, a dimly lit chamber lay undisturbed for centuries. Flickering torches cast eerie shadows on the towering walls covered in sacred hieroglyphs. An elderly priest knelt before a newly uncovered tablet, his hands trembling as he read the inscription aloud. "Blood of the divine shall defy the gods, and the sands shall weep in their wake," he whispered, his voice barely audible. A gust of wind howled through unseen cracks, making the flames waver. The priest clutched his chest, fear tightening in his throat. He turned to a younger acolyte, his face pale. "You must warn the Pharaoh." The acolyte hesitated, his eyes wide with fear. A loud crack echoed through the chamber, as if the temple itself had awakened to the priest's discovery. Night had fallen, and the temple's sacred sanctum remained forbidden to all but the high priests. Yet a lone figure moved through the shadows. Princess Neferet, dressed in a simple cloak, slipped past the towering pillars. She held her breath as she stepped closer to an ancient inscription. The glow of her torch caught something unexpected: her name. Carved into the stone, intertwined with a divine curse, was her fate. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears. How can this be?" she whispered, her fingers tracing the symbols. Had she been marked for this destiny before she was even born? A sudden gust of wind rushed through the chamber, snuffing out her torch. Darkness swallowed her whole. A whisper, soft yet ancient, echoed from the walls. It was neither human nor mortal. "Neferet, the gods have marked you," the voice murmured. She spun around, searching for the source. Her breath hitched. The golden statue of Isis, standing at the temple's center, seemed different. Had it moved? Its lips were slightly parted. She wasn't alone. A pedestal near the statue trembled. A golden relic, untouched for centuries, shimmered with an unnatural glow. Drawn by an unseen force, Neferet stepped forward, her hand trembling as she reached out. The moment her fingers brushed the artifact, a pulse of energy surged through her. The walls trembled, dust raining from the ceiling. The hieroglyphs shifted before her eyes, rearranging themselves as if alive. She gasped and pulled back. What is happening?" The temple's foundation rumbled beneath her feet. An ancient force had been unleashed. The city of Thebes lay silent beneath the darkened sky. The sacred Nile, once calm, now shimmered in an eerie crimson hue. The moon above had turned red, deep as spilled blood. The high priest rushed into the palace, his breath ragged as he fell to his knees before the Pharaoh. "Your Majesty, the heavens have spoken. A curse walks among us." Beyond the palace walls, fearful whispers spread. The gods had sent a warning. Back inside the temple, Neferet staggered, gripping her arm as a sudden, searing pain burned through her veins. She gasped as blackened veins slithered across her skin, creeping up her wrist like writhing serpents. The relic fell from her grasp, its glow fading as if it had fulfilled its purpose. The temple guards burst in, their torches casting long shadows. Their eyes widened in horror. "She carries the mark of the condemned," one of them cried, stepping back in fear. Neferet gasped for air, her vision blurring. The sacred halls, once filled with whispered prayers, now rang with deafening silence. The first light of dawn stretched across the golden sands, casting an ethereal glow upon the sacred Nile. The river shimmered under the rising sun, its waters reflecting the brilliance of the heavens. Fishermen drifted in wooden boats, chanting hymns to Hapi, the god of the river, their voices blending with the gentle lapping of the waves. Birds soared above, their wings slicing through the mist that clung to the water's surface. Towering palm trees swayed in the warm desert breeze, their silhouettes framing the horizon. In the distance, the colossal temples of Thebes stood proudly against the morning sky, their ancient carvings whispering the eternal tales of gods and kings. Within the grand palace, corridors of polished stone shimmered under the golden glow of torchlight. Walls adorned with lapis lazuli and precious metals reflected the wealth and power of the divine ruler. Servants moved swiftly, balancing trays of exotic fruits, spiced wines, and fragrant oils. Their bare feet padded softly against the cool floors as they worked in silence, their heads bowed in reverence. The air was thick with the scent of burning incense and fresh lotus blossoms, yet a different fragrance lingered of unrest. In the royal court, murmurs spread like a desert wind. Whispers of an ill omen, a sign of divine displeasure, rippled through the palace. Princess Neferet stood on the palace balcony, the morning sun casting a golden glow upon her skin. Draped in flowing linen, her kohl-lined eyes scanned the vast city below, where the people of Thebes bustled through the streets, unaware of the storm brewing within the palace walls. She was revered for her wisdom and devotion to the gods, yet a secret burdened her soul. In her hand, she clutched a small amulet, its surface pulsing with an eerie glow. She tightened her grip, knowing what it meant, proof of a truth too dangerous to reveal. She turned to her polished obsidian mirror. For a moment, her reflection flickered. Was it a trick of the light, or was something watching her from beyond? In the great temple of Amun, the air was heavy with the scent of burning oil. High priests gathered in the sacred chamber, their voices hushed as they circled an ancient scroll. The lead priest unrolled the fragile parchment, his expression darkening with each word he read. His hands trembled as he turned to his brethren. "A bloodline touched by forbidden power shall bring ruin," he warned, his voice barely above a whisper. "The gods have spoken." His gaze shifted toward the palace. Silence fell over the chamber as an urgent decree was sealed. The message would be sent to the Pharaoh at once. His daughter was the key to either salvation or destruction. Beneath the silver glow of the moon, Neferet moved quietly through the jasmine-laden gardens, her heart racing. The scent of night-blooming flowers filled the air, masking the scent of danger that lurked in the shadows. A figure waited for her beneath the carved stone archway. A foreign prince, cloaked in secrecy, his dark eyes filled with longing. Their hands met, fingers intertwining for just a moment before pulling away. "This is dangerous," Neferet whispered, glancing over her shoulder. "But our love is worth the risk," the prince replied. Yet the weight of the curse lingered between them. Unseen eyes watched from the darkness. A servant, a spy, or something far worse. A sudden flash of red streaked across the sky. A blood moon rose over Thebes, its unnatural glow casting an ominous hue over the city. The people turned their faces to the heavens, whispering prayers to the gods. Within the palace, fear spread like wildfire. The pharaoh's advisors murmured in uneasy tones, their eyes darting between one another. The high priests stood before the throne, their faces pale. "The gods have spoken," one of them finally said. The pharaoh clenched his jaw. "Tell me the truth. What does this mean?" The priests hesitated. The answer was too terrifying to say aloud. In the temple's depths, something ancient stirred. The relic Neferet carried was waking. The pharaoh sat alone in his chamber, staring into the flickering flames of the brazier. The weight of his crown had never felt heavier. His daughter, the jewel of his kingdom, carried a secret that could destroy them all. The priests demanded action. Some urged exile. Others something far worse. A sacrifice to appease the gods. Yet, Neferet was his child. He had held her as a newborn, whispered blessings upon her forehead. How could he condemn her? He rose to his feet, pacing the marble floors. Outside, the city murmured in fear, waiting for his decision. Would he protect his only daughter, or would he bow to the will of the gods? Neferet's nights were no longer her own. Each time she closed her eyes, visions consumed her, whispers of ancient gods calling her name, their voices woven into the fabric of her dreams. The weight of unseen power pressed against her chest, making her breath shallow. By day, strange occurrences followed her. The flames in the palace torches flickered when she entered a room. The air crackled with unseen energy, sending shivers through those around her. Servants avoided her gaze, muttering prayers under their breath. The amulet she had carried since childhood now pulsed with an eerie warmth, as though a living heart beat within it. Each night, the glow grew stronger. Was this a divine blessing, or a curse meant to unravel her fate? Within the temple of Amun, the high priests gathered in hushed voices, their faces drawn with concern. They had long feared Pharaoh's daughter was touched by something unnatural. "She is not like the others," one whispered, his fingers tightening around his staff. "No mortal should possess such power." Another priest, his voice colder, spoke from the shadows. "The gods will not tolerate this defiance. If she is allowed to rise, our rule will be meaningless." A decision had to be made. Some called for exile, others for death. One priest, his robe darkened by candlelight, slipped away. He would take matters into his own hands. Without warning, the skies darkened over Thebes. The wind howled through the streets, carrying walls of sand that swallowed everything in their path. Homes collapsed, temples cracked, and statues of the gods trembled as if they too feared what had been unleashed. People screamed, rushing for shelter as the fury of the storm engulfed them. Dust choked the air, turning day into night. In the midst of the chaos, a single name spread like wildfire. "Neferet," they whispered in fear. "She has angered the gods." Inside the palace, Neferet clutched her amulet, feeling the storm's rage inside her own body. The walls around her shook. Was this the gods' warning, or something far worse? Inside the temple, the priests gathered before the sacred brazier, chanting in urgent tones. The flames, once golden, turned black, releasing thick, acrid smoke into the air. The gods had given their answer. A sacrifice was needed. To cleanse Egypt, the cursed one had to be cast out. Messengers raced to the palace, their feet barely touching the stone. The decree was sealed, written in sacred ink. Neferet must be exiled or offered to the gods. Inside the throne room, Pharaoh read the message with unblinking eyes. His fingers trembled, but he gave no command. The weight of the gods had crushed his will. Neferet's fate was no longer his to decide. Deep within the royal crypt, Neferet wandered through corridors untouched by time. The torches along the walls flickered, casting strange shadows. A force, unseen yet powerful, guided her steps. At the end of the passage stood a golden statue of Isis, its face smooth and unmoving. As she approached, the air grew thick, her breath shallow. The statue's eyes glowed, bathing the chamber in a ghostly light. A voice, not of this world, filled the air. "The blood of the gods runs through you," it whispered. "Embrace your fate, or doom shall follow." Neferet's heart pounded. The gods had spoken, but was it a warning or a command? In the dead of night, a lone figure slipped through the temple's sacred halls. He moved with purpose, his footsteps silent against the cold stone floor. Neferet's closest confidant knelt before the high priest, his head bowed. "She is no longer loyal," he murmured. "The power within her grows. If she is not stopped, she will become unstoppable." The priests listened, their expressions unreadable. Then, a deal was struck. The traitor would lead them to her. In return, he would be given wealth and favor beyond his wildest dreams. That night, Nefret sat in her chamber, an uneasy feeling settling deep in her bones. She did not yet know that before the sun rose, the temple guards would come for her. A hand gripped Neferet's shoulder, shaking her awake. She gasped, her vision blurred with sleep. Her handmaiden knelt beside her, eyes wide with fear. "You must leave," she whispered. "Now." The night was silent, yet a terrible feeling hung in the air. Outside, distant footsteps echoed against the palace stone. They were coming. Neferet's heart pounded. If she fled, she would be an outcast, forever hunted. If she stayed, the gods' judgment would be swift. She rose to her feet, her hands trembling. The weight of her decision settled in her chest. The sands beyond the palace walls stretched endlessly into the unknown. With one final breath, she stepped forward, her destiny waiting in the darkness. Neferet was dragged through the towering pillars of the grand temple of Amun, her wrists bound in golden shackles that burned against her skin. These were no ordinary chains, they had been forged in sacred fire, meant to contain power beyond mortal comprehension. The high priests stood in a perfect circle, their voices rising in rhythmic chants, ancient words of judgment rolling through the vast chamber like an approaching storm. The scent of burning incense filled the air, mixing with the heavy weight of fate pressing against Neferet's chest. The pharaoh sat on his golden throne, his face unreadable, though his eyes were clouded with sorrow. Before Neferet, a colossal sacrificial altar loomed. Would she be offered to the gods to cleanse Egypt of its curse? A sudden gust of wind howled through the temple, extinguishing every torch at once. The chamber plunged into darkness, save for the flickering glow of the sacred brazier. Gasps and murmurs spread through the crowd. Outside, the Nile roared, its waters turning a deep, unnatural red. Statues trembled as if the gods themselves were awakening. Birds fled from the city in frantic swarms, and terrified screams echoed from the streets. The priests fell to their knees, heads bowed. The gods had spoken. But was this a sign of wrath or mercy? Neferet lifted her face toward the heavens, her heart pounding. Had her fate already been decided? As the high priest stepped forward to deliver the final rites, a shadow moved in the crowd. A figure Neferet's most trusted servant broke from the assembly, his face twisted in hesitation. With a swift motion, he pulled a blade from beneath his robes. The dagger flashed in the dim light, aimed not at Neferet, but at the high priest. A single strangled cry echoed through the temple as the priest collapsed, blood pooling at his feet. Gasps filled the air, followed by chaos. In the confusion, Neferet felt her shackles loosen. The choice was before her. Should she flee into the night or stay and face the gods' judgment? A deep rumble shook the temple floor. Dust rained from the towering columns as the massive golden statue of Amun trembled. Its eyes, once lifeless, burned with an unholy fire. A voice, ancient and thunderous, roared through the chamber, making every mortal present fall to their knees. "You dare defy the will of the gods?" the voice bellowed. "Judgment shall be delivered." The air thickened with divine power, crackling with unseen force. Neferet's breath came in short gasps, as she stepped backward. With a terrible grinding of stone against stone, the statue moved. One foot stepped forward, then another. The great god Amun had come to pass his final judgment. A wave of divine power surged through the temple, knocking Neferet to her knees. The statue's eyes burned into her soul. 3 choices echoed in her mind, as if whispered by the gods themselves. She could embrace her divine blood, ascend beyond mortality, and rule as a goddess but never again walk among her people. She could reject her destiny, live as a mere mortal, but leave Egypt to suffer in the god's wrath. Or she could surrender herself, breaking the curse and saving Egypt, but at the cost of her own soul. Tears burned her eyes. She turned toward her father, who sat frozen in his throne. She looked at the terrified people. The weight of love, history, and fate crushed her. What would she choose? Thunder crashed as Neferet rose to her feet. She turned toward the altar and stepped forward, her decision made. A golden light engulfed her, wrapping around her body like divine fire. The priests and nobles shielded their eyes, unable to withstand the radiance. The temple trembled violently. The pillars cracked, sacred carvings crumbling to dust. The statue of Amun raised its great hand, reaching toward her. The final moment had arrived. Would the gods show her mercy? Or had she sealed her own doom? Neferet closed her eyes. The gods' judgment had been cast. The storm outside ceased. The Nile's waters, once red, returned to their original clarity. The winds calmed, leaving behind only eerie silence. The great statue of Amun stilled, its divine fire fading. The god's judgment was complete. Neferet's body lay motionless upon the altar. The glow that once surrounded her had vanished. The priests stepped forward, whispering prayers as they looked upon her still form. Had she been taken by the gods, or had she defied them, her soul lost forever? The people of Egypt knelt in prayer, their eyes lifted toward the heavens. Was this the will of the gods, or had Neferet rewritten her own fate? The temple stood in eerie stillness. The torches had burned out, leaving only the dim glow of the sacred carvings that lined the walls. The divine presence that once filled the air had vanished. The Pharaoh gazed at the altar where Neferet had stood moments before. Now, only a fine layer of golden dust remained, shimmering under the pale light of dawn. The priests bowed in reverence, whispering prayers. Had she been punished, or had she ascended? Outside, the city stood in silent awe. The Nile, once a river of blood, now flowed peacefully once more. Rumors spread like the desert wind. Some claimed Neferet had been taken by the gods, her mortal form dissolving into divine light. Others whispered that she had become one with the heavens, walking among the stars, forever watching over Egypt. The Pharaoh, his heart heavy, ordered a sacred obelisk to be erected in her honor. He would not let her sacrifice be forgotten. The scribes inked her tale onto scrolls, her legend preserved for generations. Yet, no one truly knew her fate. That secret belonged only to the gods. Despite the calm, an unsettling feeling lingered. Had the curse truly been broken? The temple remained untouched for days, yet some claimed they still heard whispers when the wind howled through the ruins. Neferet's name, spoken by unseen voices, carried through the sacred halls. Beyond the city, in the endless stretch of desert, a forgotten tomb lay sealed. The priests feared disturbing it. Deep within, something ancient remained hidden, waiting. Travelers passing near the temple spoke of strange visions, a veiled figure standing among the ruins. Some swore she was watching, her presence lingering just beyond the reach of time. Was Neferet a victim of fate, or had she defied destiny itself? Her love had been forbidden, yet her sacrifice had saved an entire kingdom. Did the gods punish her, or did they grant her a fate greater than any mortal could comprehend? The gods remained silent. They did not mourn, nor did they celebrate. To them, mortal struggles were like grains of sand, small, fleeting, yet necessary. And so, life in Egypt continued. The temple stood, the Nile flowed, and the people prospered. But the lesson of Neferet's story remained clear. No soul, no matter how powerful, could ever escape the will of the divine. As the sun set over Thebes, the golden dunes whispered their final song. The wind carried the echoes of the past, stirring the sands that had buried countless stories before. Above, the stars shimmered like ancient eyes, watching, waiting. The world would change. Temples would fall, cities would rise and be forgotten. But legends never died. Somewhere, in the hush of the desert, her name remained. Her name is written in the breath of the desert, in the silence of the tombs, and in the eternal gaze of the gods. And so, Neferet's story lived on, carried by the wind, never truly lost to time.